so much you may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time.
Welcome to Is It Bad for the Economy? I'm Democratic Media Consultant Kobi Tirey, and every 2 weeks I ask my co-host Banker Bill to let me know whether Trump's economic policies are good, bad, or just a load of hot air. We're recording this on Sunday, June 15th, and right now the economy is definitely not the number one story. Americans are taking to the streets in historic numbers for anti-ICE and No King's Day protests. Trump is crossing red lines about deploying American troops on U.S. soil, both by overreacting to those protests and with his pathetic little birthday parade. In Minnesota, a Democratic lawmaker was assassinated and a second injured, and we're seemingly getting sucked into a war with Iran. But Trump's big, beautiful bill is looming right around the corner. And unlike the tariffs, Doge chainsaw cuts, and immigration enforcement, we'll be locked into the negative consequences of this bill for years after Trump's finally gone. When you start reading this bill, it's obvious what happened. Trump said yes to everything. He said yes to every tax cut, spending cut, and conservative funding gimmick he could fit into this thing with zero regard as to whether the math actually checked out in the end. This bill has something for everybody to love and hate. It's a cherry picker's paradise. So let's get the cherry picking out of the way. One interesting idea in the big beautiful bill would find the worst of the worst colleges in terms of debt to income ratios and redistribute that money to schools that are delivering for students. Banker Bill, this sounds a lot like what you were talking about in our recent student loan episode about making sure schools bear some of the risk when it comes to student loans. What do you think, Banker Bill? Is $3 trillion added to the deficit worth this fun little policy cherry?
Look, I think it's a step in the right direction, for sure. Now that universities will have some semblance of skin in the game for the decisions that they make in admissions and ensuring that the outcomes that we discuss in our episode are commensurate with the debt or the amount that it costs to attend that school. It's not everything I would have advocated for. There's some things I don't really care for. There's other things that got left out that I would care to see included, but I'm not going to let perfection be the enemy of good here. It's a step in the right direction for sure.
One major caveat with this policy is that any loans that are in default aren't actually going to attribute to the negative consequences for colleges who aren't doing right by their students. Doesn't that just completely give away the game here? That this is just a half-baked idea, sure, with some merit in it, but just something some Republican was allowed to throw in the bill so they could cherry-pick policies to say that they were doing bold, innovative, constructive policy things when we know this is just driving up the deficit with tax cuts for the rich.
Probably. I mean, to not have default loans in it does reduce the impact on maybe the worst offenders, but those are probably some institutions that we touched upon in the prior episode that maybe had donated or to the campaign or know the right people to be carved out. And it's one of those situations. But ultimately, look, I think this really shouldn't be part of the bill, even though I do support it and the tenets of it. So I expect that the Senate will probably strike it before anything that's actually agreed upon through the reconciliation process, right?
Exactly right. Thank you so much for making that point for me. That's exactly where I wanted to go. You can cherry pick all you want, whether it's tanning beds or private jets or whatever it is. Again, there's something in here for everybody to love and everybody to hate, and who knows what's going to survive reconciliation. I was hoping by taking a little break that we'd get some more details about what the Senate was going to keep and not keep in this bill, but they seem to be at a complete standstill. But I don't really care if they're at a standstill or not. I think I can definitively say once and for all, the Democrats are now officially the party of fiscal responsibility. How could you ever take Republicans seriously when this bill has already passed the House and it's getting the streamlined, force it through treatment from Trump himself? This bill explodes the deficit by $3 trillion, and that's if you believe the conservative estimate by the CBO. If you took every single thing in this and made it permanent, as opposed to all of the shenanigans being used to make the number seem as low as possible, it'd be $5.1 trillion to the deficit. Can we just stop pretending that Republicans are serious and admit that if we're ever going to get the deficit in control, it's going to be under a Democrat's watch?
The messaging they get on fiscal conservatism really upsets you, doesn't it?
Yes, it really bugs me that Republicans seem to get the benefit of the doubt when they keep pulling stunts like this. I stopped believing this story that Republicans actually cared about the debt when Bush came in and he did his tax cuts after Clinton balanced the budget. And that didn't pay us any dividends, that didn't create any growth. It just increased the deficit while he was waging two wars. Then we had a major, major fight in the Obama administration about making those tax cut permanent. And now we're doing the exact same thing with the Trump tax cuts. This is 4 major rounds of making tax cuts, calling them temporary in order to juice the CBO estimates, in order to juice the debt ceiling limit process. And what is this, the second, third, fourth decade of this? I mean, this is ridiculous.
Look, I don't think Democrats are stewards of fiscal conservatism either, but I would say that at this point, the facade of Republicans being the party of fiscal conservatism is certainly crumbling, right? I'm not sure anyone in the House on either side is really fiscally responsible or even just cares about that. Maybe they are, but they don't really care about it as far as the politics of the moment go. And there's maybe a handful on either side in the Senate. And there's probably 5 or 6 holdouts maybe in the Senate who would need to save face, and maybe Ron Johnson's one of them.
Look, I wish we lived in a world in which Democrats were the tax and spend party, and you can say that arguably in the past they have been that party. But in this day and age, if you, as a good faith fiscal conservative, come to a Democrat and say, hey, I understand what you're trying to do with this policy, but it's just too expensive. We can't afford this right now with the deficits being what they are. You're going to get compromise. You're going to get some back and forth about how we can cut some waste and abuse from the program. If you go to the Trump MAGA-crats right now to talk about fiscal conservatism, they're going to call you gay and primary you.
Yeah, they don't care.
They don't care.
That's populism. They don't care.
So, I get it if Democrats and true fiscal conservatives disagree about how responsible really is responsible.
Yeah, but I think to that point right there is that on both sides, it is some virtue signaling.
There is some virtual signaling, but if you are serious about fiscal conservatism, come negotiate with the Democrats. Stop trying to hold MAGA-crats responsible. It's not going to happen. They're using you as tokens. And it's time to stop pretending like if I just want the economy to work, I just want to balance the budget and want to, put a big dent in the deficit, then you should vote Democrat by default.
Yeah, good luck with that. It'll take you maybe a couple more cycles to win that message over. But you're getting there with these with the current proposals that are out there. They're like you touched on it, the increases to the deficit, tax cuts coupled with spending increases. Yeah, it's hard to say that there's any fiscally conservative or beneficial components to the current account in that regard.
One thing that's really interesting me about this political fight as it's coming down in the Senate is that there are 2 factions within the Republican Party who are actually trying to kill the bill. One of them are the fiscal conservatives, the Ron Johnsons, as you mentioned. Rand Paul, of course, always.
Yes, of course.
But the other faction is the pro-Medicaid, pro-spending, pro-SNAP, pro-energy rebate policy. The senators who are benefiting from all of those energy policies of Biden's. The big 3 seem to be Murkowski, Moran, and Tillis, but especially on Medicaid, Josh Hawley, one of the biggest MAGA guys on the planet, he's right there with him. And that's because he is in a state that elected to do Medicaid expansion. And not only did they get all those people insurance and get them on the books, they enshrine that in their state constitution. And so, give Hawley credit. He's being a true representative of his state and his state's constitutional interests within the federal framework. So we don't know what's going to happen in the Senate here, but Trump is doing everything he can to push this bill through. And if it's not streamlined, we don't know what's going to happen. If this thing loses any steam whatsoever, it could completely fall apart because it is just so big and so expansive. If some lobbies manage to tear some pieces off of this and that creates a problem when it goes back to the House, SALT, major red flag on how that's going to shake out.
Do you think because SALT, for those what I think it's maybe 4 or 5 reps in the Northeast, if they have to hold out, this is their single issue, because if they don't, they're gone, and it doesn't matter if they get primary, they're going to lose. They're going to lose to a Republican. That primary is going to lose to a Democrat if they don't go back to their constituents and say, I at least doubled or tripled the SALT. So that one way or another is saying that's going up. It has to. The Senate's going to have to give them that, some piece of it. Maybe it's not 40, but it's got to go up, or else all of those seats are immediately at risk, aren't they?
That's exactly the calculus that Republicans are making right now. But you have to remember that there's a big incentive disparity between those blue state Republican congressmen and often those red state senators who aren't experiencing those same pressures. Who knows how concerned they really are with keeping the House when they have so many voters at home who do really believe that they should be fiscally conservative in this situation, especially with people taking to the streets the way that they did yesterday, whether it's to push back on the militarism and the King comments, or whether it's to stand up to ICE and to defend immigrants and the economic activity happening in folks' backyards. This is not a good moment for the Trump administration. They are incredibly weak. And if this takes much longer than July 4th, who knows if Trump has the juice to push this through, or if we have to start from scratch. And then that's his major piece of legislation. To me, that's the craziest part of all of this. He is banking his entire political legacy on this budget bill, on his tax cuts. He's not trying to change immigration law. He's not trying to enshrine the DOJ cuts and streamlining into law. He's trying to make this bill, these tax cuts, this is what he's going for broke over. And I just, not the tariffs. He's not enshrining those into law. It's the tax cuts. And so I just want to ask you right now, are the tax cuts worth a squeeze? I thought we'd buried voodoo economics.
Yeah, I guess. So just for me to simplify, let me ask you a question. His political, or the administration's political capital, diminishes fairly quickly by what? The spring, next spring?
I think it's diminished now.
So it's kind of like the bill now or never or nothing.
That's what it feels like in a lot of ways. Yeah. I mean, Trump is, of course, the ultimate escape artist. Who knows how he could regain the political momentum. But it's hard to see with the opposition that's mounting against him on the grassroots right now how he could turn things around in order to get $3 trillion of debt added to our deficit.
All right. So to the tax cuts thing, the tax cuts in a vacuum can be stimulative in the short and intermediate term. If they're not offset by spending cuts, pay-fors, or budget cuts elsewhere, they probably do reduce long-term growth. In my lifetime and looking at these things, the politicians seem to always overestimate the impact of the cuts. For example, you go back to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2018, GDP rose from 2.4% in 2017, I think, to 2.9% in 2018. So that was a half point bump year over year. Unemployment was already pretty low at that time. So that was a half point. It's pretty good. By 2019, though, we were back to 2.3%. So you got like a 1 year bump out of it, right? In terms of short-term stimulus. But the magnification and when you do your tax cuts really depend on a variety of factors. If you cut taxes for the wealthy, you're probably not going to get much of a stimulative boost, or as much, I shouldn't say not much, but as much of a stimulative boost as if you cut taxes elsewhere, because high earners spend less of the increased income. So that is probably not going to stimulate consumption. Money probably gets invested. So savings and investment, would go up. Not great if you're looking for a stimulus or trying to, increase consumption. It also matters too, what's your economic output like at the time of the cut? Are you cutting at a time of high or low unemployment? If your unemployment is low, then the cutting probably doesn't help you that much because you're already close to your upper limit of what you can reach in your economy through your labor force. So it seems like what they're doing now, these additional, this budget's basically stimulus. It's more stimulus. Maybe you're probably going to get a short-term boost out of it again in terms of economic growth with additional spending. And then it'll come back down and you'll add more to the deficit, which is what we've been doing for, 25, 30 years.
One of the things that's so politically unbelievable about this bill is how it completely just ignores the social contract, essentially, that these bills have followed in the past. This bill is incredible in how it benefits the top 10% of earners by giving them essentially 2.3% after-tax income. And the bottom 10% are going to lose 3.9% in their after-tax income because of all of the benefits that they're going to be losing in terms of these cuts. This is the most regressive bill since we had the deficit welfare panics of the 90s. The only bill that would have come close was the Obamacare repeal, which of course, fell on its face. Politically, this is unheard of. Even Trump himself during the campaign was talking about taxing the rich, and I think nobody should be surprised that that was all hot air. But economically speaking, there is no case to be made for transferring wealth from the poor to the wealthy, is there? I mean, can we just say trickle down economics is done?
If this is the case,
yeah,
then this bill is less stimulative than I think it is. in the short term. And then you're telling me he's spending all of his political capital on this bill that probably isn't going to have, or would not have, the near-term boost that you'd otherwise expect it to, because the additional spend is going at the top end of income, which probably aren't going to spend it. It's going to be saved or invested, which means you wouldn't get short-term consumption. Maybe you get long-term benefit, long-term growth, maybe. I don't know. Where does that leave the plan?
This is a bad plan that puts us on bad footing. And yes, you can absolute cherry pick stuff in here, like the college idea that we just talked about.
Going through it, there's stuff in here that I like. Not that it should be part of this bill, but yeah.
Don't fall for it. Don't let them go, oh, but did you know about this little thing? Oh, but no tax on tips? Like, yeah, I understand that that's going to be a big deal for a lot of people. But
the no tax on tips is such great messaging. Who was paying tax on tips to begin with?
Right. I mean, some folks have even said, and I don't look, it was a really great policy. It really worked for the Trump administration. Democrats
marketed so well.
Democrats should have done it. Okay, we completely lost this one. Okay, I'm not trying to sort of make excuses on that front. It was brilliant, executed brilliantly, major part of the victory. But I have seen folks, sort of more conspiracy minded on the left be like, this was all a conspiracy just to get you to declare that income. Who was declaring their tips in the first place? The other, of course, the big thing, there are some cuts in here. There are 1.5 trillion in estimated cuts. Senate wants to make it even more, wants to try to get as close to 2 trillion as possible. The vast majority of that is coming from Medicaid, and then there's some extra from SNAP and just a tiny little bit in the student loan department that we were just talking about.
Is that $1 trillion a year or $1 trillion over 10?
Again, my understanding is that all CBO reports are over 10 years, which is why it's so easy to game them.
So that's nothing. It's nothing. $100 billion a year in cuts on a $5 trillion budget. Thanks. So many cuts. You guys really sharpen your pencils.
But are those positive trade-offs that would come from reducing the deficit, are we going to experience any of them if the entire package increases the deficit by $3 trillion? Aren't we just punishing the poor without any sort of positive effects for them if we're overall still increasing the deficit?
Maybe. I mean, I just don't think it's that simple and that cut and dry. I mean, the cuts, again, if it depends on who you make the cuts for, the cuts are going to the wealthy. You're going to get more savings and investment. People are going to argue that's going to stimulate economic growth and it's going to trickle down, whatever. And that goes back to what I said earlier of, yes, there is trickle down, but it's often less than the politicians always market it who are pushing the bills at the given time.
And that makes complete sense to me on the taxes, on how shifting that big amount of money from the federal government to private individuals, how there's going to be a short-term boom and bust there. But in terms of kicking 10.9 million Americans off of Medicaid, which is what CBO is estimating, and Republicans would tell you that the majority of that is going to come through kicking people off who shouldn't have been on there in the first place, or forcing them to work a lot more than they were previously. But is there any sort of short-term economic boom from 10.9 people losing their health care? Isn't that just them being worse off and all of the people who are getting paid to provide medical treatment for them, all of a sudden they're losing as well? Are there any winners?
You may recall in Arkansas, 17, 18, they established a work requirement for adults enrolled through its Medicaid expansion program with 30 to 49-year-olds. That disenrolled something like 18,000 people until a federal court ruling in 2019 or 2020 halted any further implementation. Now, the expectation was that creating work requirements would increase employment. People would enter labor force to gain insurance through their employer. It didn't happen. Come back and you look at the data, the uninsurance rate went up, but unemployment didn't get any better. There's arguments of how that happened, but seems like it was due to administration technicalities, barriers to employment. They removed all of these people, and it's not that they weren't eligible, it's that they got kicked off mostly for technicalities. Didn't fill out a form, didn't submit something, but nonetheless were deserving.
You alluded to this a few times when we were talking about the one good idea, the college idea or whatever, that we were just cherry picking and saying it shouldn't be in this bill. And I feel the same way about these Medicaid improvements. If the Republican Party really wants to come to us and they say, we have a really great plan for reducing poverty. We have a really, really great plan for creating an education and development funnel where you start off on SNAP and Medicaid, and you get worked through a program that we know works, and at the end you're going to be a self-reliant worker contributing to American society. If they had some sort of program, look, they won the election. I, as a Democrat, would have to say, let them try it. Let's see how this goes. But this is so clearly a budgeting ploy that's part of the budgeting policy that's just trying to get them as much wiggle room to get as many tax cuts for the rich before we have another debt ceiling fight in August.
If you wanted to tackle Medicaid as a general issue, you would think you do it as one bill on its own and not by using it and leveraging it to play different numbers games to justify spending increases elsewhere.
Right. And I think where I was going with that, because of the Arkansas example that you gave, is we have this sort of vision of that sort of urban welfare queen that Reagan established. Typically, when we think of poverty, we think so often of urban poverty. But in a rural community where there just isn't that much work, or a rural community that's so dependent on the healthcare jobs that those Medicaid policies bring with them, that might not be possible. That might not make sense in that community. And so this sort of one size fits all approach, again, undermines any sort of good faith that anybody's claiming to have, that this is about helping people and getting our deficit under control at the same time. This is all
it's just to kick them off.
Yeah.
It's just to kick them off. People are employed today and they have health insurance through their employer, right? Or they're qualifying for Medicaid without a work requirement, but could qualify today if there were a work requirement for Medicaid. In my view, they would qualify today because these people are working. The underemployment rate included is 7.5%, 8%. So there's jobs are bountiful out there. People are working. In Arkansas, employment did not increase, but uninsurance rate did go up. So it's not like you kicked a bunch of people off and all of a sudden people went and got jobs. Basically what happened was there were people working who otherwise qualified, were kicked off, stayed working, and then didn't go re-enroll, or tried to re-enroll and maybe the application was sent to the wrong place, or they filled something out incorrectly and then said whatever and didn't complete or restart the process.
And the reason why I just keep hammering on this is that so often the conversation that we think we're having politically is, can we afford to help more people? Can we afford to help as many people as we're currently helping? Or are we somehow creating a future fiscal situation with the debt? Or are we somehow dampening our economic potential because people are trapped in a welfare cycle and they're not contributing as much to the economy as they would if they didn't have these bad incentives in the first place? That is the sort of the political conversation that I feel like we grew up with, and I think was true to a certain extent at that time. It is not true today. It is not true at all. And so if somebody wants to say to me, I don't want to pay for those people to live, then that's fine. But don't try and tell me it's good for the economy. Don't tell me that this is part of an economic policy that's going to create a rising tide lifts all ships moment.
Well, look, I think in both parties, neither are playing for the middle 80. It is on the Republican side mostly a pandering to the upper 20 and the special interest groups there, or the Democrats pandering to the bottom 20. Neither party is really focusing on that middle 80.
I would push back against that wholeheartedly. I think that the Democrats absolutely do have the middle 80% in mind. If you look at the Bush tax cuts, round 2 of the Bush tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, round 2 of the Trump tax cuts, there is no handout to the bottom 5, 10, 20% that even comes close to that scale. The one program that may be in the ballpark, Obamacare, which had a lot for the middle as well as it did for folks at the very bottom. There, when fiscal conservatives came to us and said, hey, we know you won the election, but this is too much, there was a major compromise. We got rid of the public option. So, no, I think that there are two entirely different leagues of handouts. The handouts to the rich people are out of control. Democrats' ability to invest in the bottom 10, 20% of Americans has been completely non-existent politically for decades now. And so the few things that the Democrats have been able to do for the middle class are completely glossed over as not being enough. And then the Democrats don't get any credit. And then we keep having these narratives about how Democrats just want to give handouts to the bottom 5%, the bottom 15%. Where are the handouts? Where are the handouts?
The perception of it is different. So the perception of it is Republicans the giveaways are really keeping more of what you already have versus the perception of the government giving away to the bottom, say 20%. And that perception is what really differentiates the topic. And I think what you're saying is the quote giveaways basically keep more of what you have by way of lower taxes. Yeah, I agree. It probably does vary in some orders of magnitude greater than anything of quote giveaways that have occurred for the bottom 10 to 20%. You see some of that in the, for example, in the SNAP cuts that they're doing. It's a $112 billion a year program on what is a $5 trillion a year budget. They're basically increasing the defense budget by 150 billion and cutting SNAP in half, which is a domestic only program, right? SNAP, that's all domestically sourced food, domestically facilitated, domestically provided, and then used by citizens. My point is, it's a very small amount of money.
It's a very small amount of money.
Scope and scale versus everything else.
Only one president in our lifetimes has literally given handouts to the bottom 5, 10, 20%. And that was President Trump. So if you want to get serious about fiscal conservatism, if you want to sort of unleash that economic potential, come negotiate with the Democrats and stop.
They don't. The facade's crumbling.
Yeah, those of you who are real about this, good faith about this, in my personal
life, you're talking about 6 to 8 senators.
No, I'm talking about voters like you.
Oh, thanks. Okay, I'm with you now.
I'm talking about the folks who went, I don't like Trump, but it seems fiscally irresponsible for me to vote for the Democrat, for the tax and spend Democrat.
Yeah.
It would have been fiscally more responsible for you to vote for the Democrat. And that's been true in most presidential elections.
Yeah. I mean, if Kamala Harris had become president and you had this Congress, this bill it'd be so skinny. It wouldn't be big. It might be beautiful. Like Elon Musk said, you can't have big and beautiful.
If Republicans were just doing these cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, politically, I wouldn't have a leg to stand on.
Right, but you couple it with all the stimulus elsewhere, either by way of paying for defense or increasing the estate taxes up to $15 million.
If they had made these tax cuts and actually made compensatory cuts to pay for them all,
sure,
that I would still fight tooth and nail against them, because why are we giving handouts to the rich? But still, politically, that would be sound. That would be a good faith policy proposal.
It's not what this is. This is just campaign promises. Promises made, promises kept.
Again, Trump said yes to everybody.
Yeah. I mean, in the bill, it certainly seems that way. How I'm asking you to speculate, but just for 30 seconds, indulge me. How much do you think gets cut? What are some of these sexy things that are in the headlines that you think wind up not making it?
First of all, I don't know. I think that what this comes down to is how much control does Donald Trump have over Republican senators?
And you're saying that decreases by the day.
Let's just look at how this has played out during this term so far. There was all this pushback against his cabinet picks before the inauguration. Gates gets pushed out. Elon Musk swoops in and says, no more of that. We're not doing any more of that. You do what Trump tells you to do. They get all the crazies. They get RFK Jr. They get the FBI director. All of a sudden, Musk gets wiped out in Wisconsin. He becomes politically toxic. Then he has this falling out with Trump and gets booted out of the White House.
Sure.
So this big primary threat hammer. If you go against Trump, I'm going to primary you, and that person's going to have $100 million to go to war against you on day one, and you're probably going to lose because President Trump controls the Republican Party, controls Republican primary voters. That threat is not nearly as powerful as it was 3 months ago. It used to be that every politician had real policy beliefs that you could appeal to. They had real policy beliefs that you could negotiate with, that you could throw them a bone on this and maybe they negotiate with you on that. This Trump era has been defined by no shame, no policy integrity, just do what sounds cool and we'll win the next election and it won't be a big deal. And if Trump's on the ballot, usually that goes pretty well. And if he's not, it usually goes pretty poorly. The question is do these Republican senators have a genuine policy interest in fiscal conservatism? Are they the last politicians left who really believe this stuff? They certainly would like to think they are.
Maybe they do, but do their constituents? I'm not sure their constituents do. And if they don't, the senators like Ron Johnson are just virtue signaling.
I don't think they're worried about their constituents. They're worried about the primary voters. They're not worried about their ability to beat a Democrat. They think that as senators, they have the juice in their home state to be able to go up against a default Democrat and be able to beat them. They're the incumbent. They have that advantage.
Right. So then if the median Trump voter does not care about deficits and is a deficit populist, then it's in their best interest to just cave.
You would think that, except for Trump won't be on the ballot next time. Trump's superpower electorally is to get people to vote who never would vote under any other circumstances. So all of a sudden that math gets really, really complicated. Do I have enough juice to win a primary in my home state on my own merits with my own political machine, even if I did have to go to war against Trump? And Trump's track record is not undefeated. It's formidable, but people have beat his primary
like much else. It's overstated.
But that math gets very, very complicated for them. It's the Senate as well, so you have those rotating schedules. Is their next reelection battle in 2, 4, or 6 years? That changes the math greatly. And then you have purple versus red states, and places like New Hampshire, places like Alaska. It really does feel like that fiscal conservatism, that sort of libertarian conservatism, is still alive in some of those places. That's why I think it's so interesting that the fight in the Senate is not coming down neatly on this fiscal conservatism versus non-fiscal conservatism. There's Republican senators saying, you're cutting too much from Medicaid. I actually want this budget to inflate the deficit even more.
Oh, really?
Collins, Murkowski, Hawley, and Moran, I don't know how they would make that up somewhere else, but they're not trying to kill this bill because they want the deficit to be lower. They're trying to kill this bill because they're saying it cuts too much of Medicaid, and they can't have that in their state, and they definitely can't win in their state if we're going to cut Medicaid that much.
So the compromise is cut Medicaid less and reduce things like the SALT deduction. And can these senators and House members agree on that? If you held everything constant, or if you let these tax cuts expire, and then you also cut the Medicaid, that's not sellable at all, is it?
No, I think that would be sellable. If you let the tax cuts expire and you said, okay, the rich are going to pay more, and
no, not necessarily pay more. Let's take it back. We're just going to go back to pre-2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act policy.
Right.
That's all.
And so I'm saying politically, let's call it a tax rise. Semantics, whatever, right? But let's say, look, the rich are going to pay more now. They were paying that much 6 years ago or whatever it is. But look, the rich are going to pay more now. And the poor are going to get a little less.
Yeah.
That's the compromise. That's the both sides. That's what we're used to. And that's what this budget is completely walking away from. That Trump has absolutely no political incentive or even responsibility to try to balance this out and to offer a balanced deal to the American people.
It's remarkable to address the number 2 largest expenditure, Medicaid, and they're not addressing Medicare, I guess, but Medicaid, which is part of that number 2. And in addressing it, they are still increasing the national debt and deficit and not improving the fiscal picture. You would think if you were to attack this, you would at least get the incremental benefit of saying, hey, we're improving for a change the prospect for future generations rather than leaving them with larger debt. But no, you're cutting and also increasing debt. Incredible.
To me, that's just the important thing at the end of the day. I'm the mainstream Democrat here. I think how many people we feed, how many people we give health insurance should be an important part of the equation. I want to live in a country where everybody is getting the most out of their potential, and I think that means feeding and giving them health care. You, more in the middle, you think that deficit number, that debt number is so important that we need to focus on that and make that the first priority right now. So you want to see those cuts. Trump's position, the position of the big, beautiful bill, has nothing to do with either one of those positions. This is completely out of bounds for any sort of normal political mainstream policy objective. And they have just completely exposed the fact that they care about handouts for the rich first and punishing the poor second. And so even if you are not voting in order to help people, even if you are voting exclusively for your own pocketbook, you need to join the Democrats before we're going to improve the situation. And I want so desperately to live in a country again where the Democrats are the spenders and the Republicans are the savers, but that's just not the case.
There'll probably be some kind of market reaction depending on some bombshell that comes around July 4th about a Senate bill or a kick down the road. So there could be some kind of reaction.
And when it does, we'll tell you all about it on the next episode of Is It Bad for the Economy? Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the sports gambling episode that we showed you during the break, but we're going to be back at it in 2 weeks to let you know whether the newest big Trump idea is good, bad, or just a lot of hot air for the economy. Thank you so much for joining us.
You may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time